Welcome, welcome all of you to Park University's third virtual academic conference. In a lot of ways, I cannot believe that this is actually finally here. We've been working and developing this conference for well over a year now, and I am beyond excited, have been excited since this summer to share with you the incredible work coming from our keynote and just the thoughtful, reflective, and really powerful practices coming out of our classrooms and student services, here at Park University. We have just an incredible lineup, and I'm really looking forward to sharing them with you all. My real central hope and goal for today's conference is that we all leave here feeling hopeful, contemplative, connected, and really empowered with a plan for sort of immediate and also long-term growth for our own work at Park. That's my hope selfishly, but I also really hope that for all of us as well. And, for those of you that don't know me yet, I'm Erica Janssen. I am the Adjunct Support Associate at the Faculty Center for Innovation. And as you might have noticed by now, I'm also coordinating this conference. And so before we begin and, welcome our keynote speaker, I'm going to explain just a few things about the logistics of the conference and the flow. You'll see in our chat right now a link pop up to the virtual academic conference website, and that's housed on the Faculty Center for Innovation website. And if you go ahead and click that link, you should find the program for today's conference. I'll give you all a minute to do that. So you'll see that we'll begin with a presentation from our keynote speaker, Dr. Tracy M. Addy, and then we'll move through two different sessions on inclusive teaching and learning at Park. Our first session will focus on our classrooms, our syllabi, our course materials, and then our second session will focus on student services, so our library services and student advocacy. You might notice that the structure looks a little bit different this year too. So as you can see in the program, rather than a traditional Q&A following our keynote and each session, we're going to have a reflection and discussion that's facilitated by the FCI team, where we can sort of think together about what we've heard in each presentation, and then imagine together, what it might mean for our own work at Park. But before we get started, the first thing I'm going to ask each of you to do is to rename yourself sort of in a way that clearly reflects who you are and how you would like to be addressed during this conference. That will not only help us in the breakout rooms and in the chat to sort of know who's here and who's talking, but it will also help us to know who's attended the conference and who's won the book giveaway, which we will do shortly. So to personalize your name, you're going to go ahead and click on the participants icon, and that's in the Zoom toolbar. Once you do that, you should see a toolbar appear on the right hand with your name at the top. So you'll see here on my slide, for a long time, my name appeared just as my email address, and it wasn't really clear who I was if you didn't know me well, if you weren't emailing me regularly. And when you hover your mouse over your name, you should see two options come up. So rename or add profile picture. And for today's purposes, you can simply just click on rename, and then you should see a new pop-up box entitled rename, and it will give you the opportunity to write in how you would like us to address you during this conference. We just ask that you type in a name that clearly identifies you and reflects, how you would like us to call you. And that's it. It's a cool trick for Zoom meetings if you want to change your name depending on context and audience, but don't want to change it permanently across all your Zoom meetings. We also have on this call our amazing Park IT support, Keith Routh. He'll be on for the duration of the conference. So please feel free to send Keith a private message in the chat if you have any tech questions that you feel like we might be able to help you with. So Keith, if you don't mind, maybe just saying a quick hello in the chat so everyone can see your handle. There he is. So yeah, you can just send Keith a private message if something isn't working for you, and it's something that we can help you with. Yes, thank you so much, Keith, for being on today. I can't tell you sort of the relief and sense of sureness it gives me to know that we have Keith backing us up. We are just so glad he's here. And I can see he has a little fan base going in the chat as well. So the last thing I'll say is that the entire conference will be recorded. And we will post recordings of all the presentations following the conference on our website. So keep a heads up for that. But without further ado, we're off. I am just so ready to get started. I've been waiting for this, it feels, for so long. I'm so excited. Welcome to everyone that's here. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your time, your energy, sort of your enthusiasm with us this morning. I'll begin officially by kicking it off to Dr. Michelle Myers, our provost, to say a few words to us all.
Well, thank you, Erica. Good morning, everyone. And you can hear and see, honestly, the enthusiasm of Erica in her opening remarks, and that's just to kick off the conference. We haven't even started the learning yet, so it's very, very impressive. I am impressed and humbled by the turnout at this academic conference. It speaks to your commitment to advancing teaching and learning, not only in your individual classrooms, but at Park as a whole. When our faculty invest in their learning, as you are doing today, you invest in our students' learning. Thank you for setting the example. And I don't want to take your time today, so I'm going to pass it on to the Associate Provost, Dr. Emily Salih. Enjoy your day, and I'm looking forward to the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Myers, and to the other members of Park's senior leadership and executive staff in attendance today, including our president, Shane Smead. We're fortunate to have the support of our president and provost for this event and for the Faculty Center for Innovation. And it's a privilege to work for leaders who care about teaching and learning. I wanted to also thank Erica and the entire Faculty Center for Innovation team for all that has gone into planning this opportunity for learning and for fellowship with one another today. With great teaching, students succeed. I'm shamelessly borrowing that quotation from the American Association of College and University Educators because I think it so perfectly encapsulates the why behind today's event and the very existence of Park's Teaching and Learning Center, the Faculty Center for Innovation. When Park supports great teaching, the kind that happens in physical classrooms, virtual classrooms, in the library, via Zoom, through emails and text exchanges with faculty members, advisors, coaches, tutors, and advocates, we support the success of Park students. This event, in addition to the robust array of learning opportunities offered by FCI throughout the year, is aimed at keeping all of us focused on continuous learning, which lays the foundation for innovation and transformation. I'm so excited to be a co-learner with you today as we head into our keynote presentation. And it is my honor to introduce Dr. Tracy Addy, Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning at Lafayette College. Dr. Addy directs the Center for the Integration of Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship. What a cool center name, by the way, and serves in several other leadership capacities. She has authored numerous publications, including the book, What Inclusive Instructors Do, Principles and Practices for Excellence in College Teaching. Dr. Addy, thank you for joining us today to help us learn about and implement practices that promote accessibility, equity, and inclusivity for all learners. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Addy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. And it's wonderful to see you all here today. And I echo a lot of what is said. To come to this conference, to be devoted to student success, and especially, today, really thinking about inclusivity and equity is a wonderful thing. And I think your students are greatly going to continue to benefit from this. So thank you. And thank you for this invitation to speak today. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. So as was mentioned, I'm a co-author of the book, What Inclusive Instructors Do. And I've been spending a lot of time grappling with this idea of inclusion, equity. And so I'm excited to share some things with you today. And I'm also delighted to hear about all the discussions that you'll have over this. So one of my goals is hopefully that you'll be able to ponder this, to think about it, to expand upon it. And this is only the start of a conversation today. So how will this talk be situated? I'm going to first kind of talk about key points around inclusive teaching. My slide advanced a little quickly there. What are the focal points for inclusive teaching that we're really focusing on here to help us all conceptualize what we're talking about? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about pathways of commitment to inclusive teaching. So just some of the research that we've seen, and also based on some of my, working with instructors and my own teaching, how this process happens when we commit to this work. We'll talk about the key mindsets of inclusive teaching. So this is the practices and, well, actually the mindsets that we distilled from the study that we did of instructors across institutions, across disciplines. And then we'll get to the idea of what are these inclusive teaching practices. We'll share some and talk about some that really align well with these particular mindsets. So that's our journey for today. I'm going to first start out with this idea of what are we focusing on when we're talking about inclusive teaching. And I'm going to talk about two big things: sense of belonging and equity. One of the definitions that I really love, we also put it in our book, is by Strayhorn about sense of belonging. So what we're really focusing on here is students on our campus, their social supports, their ability to feel very connected, that they matter to us, to the community, that they're accepted, that they're respected, and they're valued by everyone. And so sense of belonging is a critical component of inclusive teaching, and what we're kind of focusing on, creating these welcoming environments, right, for our learners. The second piece that I want to emphasize is equity. So when we're thinking about equity, we're really thinking about those differences in our learners. They bring with them so many different wonderful things and assets to our classrooms. So they're bringing their motivations, they're bringing their prior knowledge, they're bringing their social identities, all of these wonderful things. And so when we think of equity, we're thinking about those differences and how we can respond to them, and not in the regards of like equality, right? Like where every student is treated the same, but we're actually being responsive to the diversity of our class. So inclusive teaching embraces two of these big points. How do I create this sense of belonging or help foster it in my class, make it more welcoming? And how do I make it equitable? And the reason why I talk about both is because they're very interrelated. Because when students feel as if a learning environment is equitable, they're more likely to feel a sense of belonging. And sense of belonging is very much so related to equity. So as we explore this today, I want us to kind of focus on those two big ideas and how we can actually do that in our classroom settings. So how do we actually get to this work? Well, one of the things I've seen is that instructors often, and I'd love you to reflect on this yourself, have a journey, for inclusive teaching. I see and I work with instructors across all different levels. Some are very open, committed. They're doing the work actively. Some want to do the work. They're trying to figure out how to do the work. And some, are in early stages of thinking about inclusivity. And so what does it look like in this pathway in our journey to commit to inclusive teaching? Well, first, we're recognizing there's some type of problem, right? Or problems, we could say. In higher education, many students have historically been excluded, right, from our classrooms. They haven't even been able to enter. And sometimes when they enter our classrooms, they are not, equipped or ready to kind of take on or, supported in the way that they could actually flourish in our spaces and our learning opportunities. So the first thing when we think about committing to the work of inclusive teaching, instructors are really seeing problems, right? They're seeing, there's these issues with students in my class. I really want to make it equitable. I want all of my students to thrive and succeed. So recognizing this is basically the first step. So noticing it's there. And all of you probably can talk to some particular inclusivity challenges you've seen students experience, right, in your classes. So what are those problems, right, that we're seeing, and how can we tackle them? So that's the first step. Then what happens with our mindsets is really thinking about, wow, these problems require us to act and to act soon. And if there's no immediate action there, we're just going to sit on it, right? We're not going to do anything about it. So committing to the work of inclusive teaching requires us to really think about it as something that requires action, and then assuming that responsibility, right? So it is part of my responsibility as an instructor to build a more inclusive classroom space. And some of the studies we've done, we've looked at kind of barriers to inclusive teaching that instructors have, perceived barriers, et cetera. And one of them is like, it's not my job, right? This is not my work. You know, this is the Office of Diversity and Inclusion's work. This is not something I need to do in my classroom space. And we're going to kind of push back against that and say, absolutely, it is. And we can see from students how important the classroom space is when we assume this responsibility. And then a really critical point is knowing how to help. You know, I work with a lot of instructors. I run an academy focused on inclusive teaching, and it involves student partnerships. So I have student fellows in my center who work specifically with faculty on their inclusive teaching efforts. They do observations, they give them feedback, and then we also meet, we talk about it, we talk about the research. They have a goal, they set it in the beginning of a course, you know, or a couple goals, and then we work throughout the course to actually implement, to get feedback, to revise and iterate. And that's what inclusive teaching and all teaching, you know, is benefits from, that process of reflection and revision as well. So some of the instructors, you know, might feel as if like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do in my classroom? So the other element of committing to the work of inclusive teaching is this idea of how do I do this, right? What are the actual things I can do to build a more inclusive space? And then finally, committing to action. So what I'm hopeful for all of you today is that you're getting into that step, or you're in that step, you're in the moment, or you're on this pathway of committing into that action. And this is a wonderful opportunity today to actually talk about some of these hows and whys, etc. So in our work with inclusive teaching, we also distilled some of the mindsets of instructors that we know build more inclusive learning environments. So what are these mindsets? And again, I invite you to reflect on this. This is going to be very much so related to some of the things I already presented in some ways. The first thing we see is that they are what I'll call learner aware. What do I mean by that? They know it is essential to know who their learners are in their classroom spaces. So they're going to try to figure out in many different ways who their learners are. They're going to do surveys of students. They're going to do informal office hours. They're going to do a lot of different activities to try to learn that and have students share. They might have students share. They're looking at the demographics. So think about Park University. Who are your students? Who are your demographics? You know, who is in your classes? So this is going to kind of be the key thing that builds upon all of the actions that our inclusive instructors take in our courses, okay, as well, in their courses. So they also see diversity as an asset. So you might have heard of these deficit models, right, of education. Oh, our students are more diverse and they're, you know, dumbing down our population, or, you know, there's different kind of rhetoric that can happen around deficit models. And unfortunately, they're still prevalent in higher education. What we see with inclusive instructors is that they see this as an asset. They see an opportunity, right, to have this diversity in their class, and they leverage that in these very distinct ways that actually shows that they, you know, are really thinking about diversity. They're really thinking about their classes. They're really thinking about their students. So they see diversity as an asset. And again, take note of this, because I'm going to ask you, which of these do you most resonate with? Okay, these particular mindsets. We also see that they're identity aware. So they're really thinking hard about students, and especially students who might be vulnerable to a stereotype threat or other kinds of circumstances, the different situations within the class. And they really affirm students, all of their students. We know that affirmation in higher education is really effective, can be really effective. Affirmations, value exercises that you can do with your students, just, telling them to write down a few things they value before a high stakes assessment. Things of that nature have been shown in the research to actually support students in their achievement in our classes. So they're very much so aware of identities and the identities of their students in inclusive teaching. This is something that I mentioned previously. They take ownership. They know it's their responsibility to design a more inclusive classroom space and that it is in their power. And so when I talk about, inclusive teaching, I often talk about it in terms of an empowerment. We can actually be empowered to actually build these spaces for our classrooms. And we also have to note that it's not always we're going to do, not make mistakes. So we are going to always be learning. And I love how today, a lot of the conversation or a lot of the talk today was about learning with you. We are learning with our students. We will make mistakes. We will grow. And a lot of our inclusive instructors embrace that type of growth mindset as well. But they're still going to take ownership, right, of building these spaces for students. They have a commitment to praxis. So we can talk about inclusive teaching all day and be like, I want to be an inclusive instructor, etc. But we actually have to do it, right? We have to apply the principles that we believe, the mindsets, all of these ideas that we believe, and to actually intentionally embed it in our course design and our teaching practices. So this is what inclusive instructors do. They are not tacking it on, right? So this is not just, tacked on to the end of the design of a course. It's actually embedded in the course design itself, as well as the teaching practices that are used. So we do see this commitment to praxis. And then finally, holistic. We know that with COVID-19, all of the things happening, social unrest in our nation, our students come with them, their whole selves. There's so much to them and dimensions to them in the classroom. So we do see that this holistic approach to teaching is critical for instructors who are inclusive in their classroom spaces. So I'm going to turn it around to you. Think about all of these different mindsets: learner awareness, diversity as an asset, identity awareness, ownership, commitment to praxis, holistic. What are you most thinking about in terms of your mindset? So we're going to do a little poll. We're going to actually do 2 of them. And in the chat, thank you very much, Jamie. She shared a link to the Mentimeter poll. So what I'd like you to do is answer that very question that's on the poll, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, okay? And then we'll come back and we'll look at your responses. So which of these most resonate with you, these particular mindsets? All right, I see lots of good responses coming in. Feel free to keep taking the poll. And here's what we see, okay? So with you, you see a lot of, resonating diversity as an asset. That looks like, one of the top ones here, as well as the learner awareness, the holistic approaches and identity awareness as well, okay? So I think it's always important before we even get to the idea of what do we do, how do we do this in our classroom, is to really think about how are we thinking about this? What is our mindset? Why are we doing this work? How do we see our students, right? How do we see our teaching and what is our philosophy around it? So these types of mindsets I think are really important to think about and are what, we see many of our inclusive instructors do. So now let's get into the actual practices, okay, of inclusive teaching. So all of these practices, I will say, will revolve around this big question: who are our learners? And I think it's a critical question to always ask us before we teach all of our courses. And so I have this fun little kind of schematic, but teach, it's just there because, I had 5 letters. So I was like, I'll put teach there. But the point is to really think about these major points. And of course, we wrote a whole book on this, right? And there's so much to talk about when we think about inclusive teaching practices. But I think this will help us kind of build that framework and think about what aligns with these mindsets. So this is what we see with what inclusive instructors do. They're going to include diverse and resonant material in their classes. So knowing who their learners are, they're going to think about the real world applications, the students' backgrounds, to actually build and add in material. Now, I know some might say, my discipline, my course, I can't do that because it's all this particular type of person or etc. But I'll say that there's many ways to do this with all regards to also current, applications or current material, and to also have students be able to apply it, to their own context. So we see real world applications, we see authentic types of assessments, those assessments where students can basically do something real world, make a blog, do a podcast, something like that, as very important practices for many inclusive instructors that they include in their courses. We also see them giving a lot of student choice. So students have an opportunity to choose topics or choose how they go about particular activities, and they use diverse types of media, okay, as well. So knowing who your learners are, you're going to be able to better build this type of material. And I can attest to the fact that our students love this. I ask my student fellows constantly, just feedback on certain things around inclusive teaching, certain practices or, things that we do as instructors. And they say that this is actually one of the most important things to them, to actually see themselves in the course material or to be able to make personal connections to the course material. Okay, so that is one particular area to really focus on and hone in on when we're thinking about inclusive teaching. The second thing we'll see inclusive instructors do is they're looking carefully at their classroom policies. So one example would be, how do they create these different atmospheres that students feel as if they can all achieve, right, in the class? And so they'll make these community agreements with their class. They will have flexibility. Again, knowing who their learners are in the class, they'll build in, particular things, but not so flexible that, students still are taking a course, right? So there still has to be elements of things that are turned in, etc., for their students, but they might build in some flexibility. So how have I seen all this play out? Well, I'll say some of our instructors, like for example, in the Inclusive Instructors Academy, use tokens, right? And so students can actually drop something, they can use their tokens, or dropping the lowest test score or quiz score or things of that nature. So building in flexibility in policy. Some will have a deadline and then a really hard deadline, when they turn in work. And so they're kind of doing this idea of life happens. My students have a lot of other things going on besides my class, and I'm building in some flexibility because ultimately I want my students to learn. I want them to achieve the learning outcomes of the course. Having that little bit of flexibility can actually help them do that. We also see a lot of things around learning focused assessment and grading. So they're really thinking about their assessments carefully. So let's do more formative feedback, right? Assessments, because we know that that helps students learn. Some have moved towards things such as ungrading. I don't know if anyone's seen that or tried to adopt that. We actually are just running a community of practice around ungrading right now at my school, and that is definitely intersecting with inclusivity. One of my fellows, for example, focuses on ungrading. One of my faculty fellows focuses on ungrading as an abolitionist teaching tool so that they use in their classroom. Another one has seen, various ties to ungrading and inclusivity, building this space where the grades aren't holding back the students and we're focusing more on learning and helping students grow. So they're thinking very intentionally about the assessments and the grading that happens in the classroom setting. So these are all very early things to do, right, while we're designing a course. But then when we get to the actual course itself, how do we create this environment that's welcoming? So our inclusive instructors are absolutely doing that. And oh, I see something in the chat. There's a question around ungrading. We can allow that to be a discussion point later if you'd like. Okay, it sounds like you're going to have opportunities for discussion. So that might be a great time to really get into these ungrading practices. And thank you for your question. So creating that welcoming environment is also great for students. So look at the tone of your syllabus. Is it only contractual? We talk a little bit about in our book about the syllabus as a living constitution, right? So it's our thinking about our community and how we interact with one another. And we're also going to create these tones in it that it's like we language, right? We're thinking about our learners. It's very student-centered in that way. So think about your syllabi, think about the language that you use, the tone that you're setting. Look at your course site. Does it, reflect a very welcoming space and environment for your students? Are you also talking about your availability, right, as an instructor, and that you're going to be open, right, to actually having them talk to you, to ask questions, etc.? Or does it seem more kind of standoffish, right, and more contractual? We also see inclusive instructors doing informal hours for their students. So this really took off during the COVID-19 pandemic, but basically times where every student will be able to meet with you. And of course, for larger classes, this is a little bit more logistically challenging, of course, but being able to just have those times to sit, ask the students, why are you taking this course? What motivates you? A little bit about themselves. And building that tone very early on to create that welcoming environment for the learners in your courses. Another thing that we also see is how to use strategies that promote equitable learning. So we're focusing on evidence-based strategies. So here we are, in this C area. So we know that students thrive with organization. We know that they thrive with structure. What do we mean by structure? We mean by actually having kind of a specific sequence of events in your class. Maybe you move from a little bit of a discussion to small group activities to back to kind of a overarching wrap up. So there's going to be some kind of structure in your class. Students know the predictability of it, and that also can help them succeed. Active learning. Okay, we're doing more than just talking to our students and lecturing. We're having them reflect and think about their learning as well. And a number of principles in learning science we know have been super and very much so successful in classroom spaces and building equity in our spaces. And then finally, also, this is going to be a conversation today for you for a future talk, but support resources. Do we give our students access to these resources, for example, on our learning management system? One of our student fellows at one point said that I really love when my instructors, think about who's in the class, and some of us may have not had access to certain things or have developed certain skills. They put it up on the learning management system, some resources to help us kind of keep up or catch up, et cetera, with the class so that we don't feel so behind, right, when we're starting this new material. So those types of support resources are critical, as well as on campus support resources, right? So some of the things that I know we're going to talk about today, the library support resources and all of the other community partners, we're all in this together to build more inclusive and equitable spaces. And then finally, I think one of the most important parts of being an inclusive instructor is getting that feedback. So our inclusive instructors are doing surveys of their students, anonymous course surveys, or getting observational feedback. They're doing self-reflections. They're trying to figure out, is this working for my class? Is it working for my students? And they're iterating, right, continually on their instruction. So those key things all, again, revolve around thinking about who's in our class. It revolves around thinking about what we have in our class with regards to our material that we present, the policies that we use, the welcoming environment that we create, the day-to-day strategies that we use, as well as knowing what is working, right? Getting that feedback and revising and iterating it in general so that we know that what we're doing in our classroom is effective for our students. So I want you all to think about this, and we are going to take the next poll. So processing what you've thought about, what we've talked about. Again, there's so many things that we could talk about with inclusive teaching. I'd love you to advance. I'm going to advance to the next poll, and you're basically going to respond to the next question on our poll. So let me take a minute here and activate that one. And I'd love for you to apply this by really thinking about what are some inclusive teaching principles that and practices that you use in your own courses. So let's share some today, because I know some of you are doing some good work around this. So let's actually build upon the things that we do. So I'll give you a minute to answer that poll. Okay, lots of good things coming in. So I'm going to share my screen again, and let's look at what you're doing in your classes. So I see I don't have any yet, and I'm open to learning. That's wonderful. And, you know, a great place to start is here, right? During this virtual conference, you'll see so many different, you know, types of strategies. You know, I've shared a few of them already. And then, of course, our book talks about a bunch of different practices, what inclusive instructors do. So thank you for sharing and for being here today and, you know, trying to learn more about your class. I see student feedback on syllabi, classroom experiences, multiple points. So getting that feedback, you know, is a great thing. Setting classroom norms and expectations collectively with students. Yes, absolutely. I had one of our faculty fellows, she focused actually on co-creating classroom guidelines and different ways to do that. And I think that's a really great way to build an inclusive environment. I see a learner asset inventory. So they can share what they're bringing to the subject. Yeah, wonderful. So they're inviting the input from your students. Having students create their norms on the first day of class. This one coincides really nicely with that one. Survey at the start of class, absolutely. Different questions I can learn, and let's keep moving over a little bit. Flexible office hours with a range of modalities. Text by diverse writers, mid-course evals. Great, you're doing a lot of wonderful things in your class. Let's scroll down a bit. Positioning my classroom as a safe space in my syllabi, materials in class. Yeah. So actually expressing to students that this is a space for them and that, you know, you're creating this environment can be very impactful for learners as well. I see midterm feedback surveys, into project surveys here. Wonderful. Lots of pre-semester questionnaires as well. Projects where students collect data on an area they're interested in working on. Yeah. Letting students give their work experience as it relates to his or her job. Very good. So yeah, so a lot of wonderful practices that you're using in your courses and even more. And I'll also share the results of this poll. So those who also want to just think about and steal the practices of others, you know, this is the place to do it, right? Think about these things that your colleagues are doing. Are there things that you might consider also doing in your classroom settings? So very good. Thank you so much for sharing all of those wonderful practices as well. So I know our time is nearly up, and I'm going to just talk about a little bit how I see this session fitting in with your other sessions. Now, I haven't talked to all of the presenters, but their titles, you know, resonate so much with what we're talking about already today. So the first one, recognizing privilege in the classroom. we focused on who are our learners, right, in the class and what are they experiencing in the class. I think that session is going to be really wonderful to really think about who are your learners and what are these issues of challenge around inclusivity that they're dealing with in the classroom so that you can actually design an environment that is even more inclusive. The other session, removing barriers by creating an inclusive syllabus. We talked about starting at the course design level. Inclusive instructors are thinking very deeply and carefully about their syllabus and about their design of their class. So how do you remove those barriers? I think that's going to be another good discussion. Partnering with library services for student success. You know, we mentioned how it's the whole campus community, right? That's really involved here. The classroom space is an important one, but we have all these community partners that can actually support our learners. So it's wonderful that your library will talk about how they can partner with you. And then finally, meeting students where they are, what our students bring with them to the classroom. That resonates 100% with what we talked about. Who are our students? How do we meet them to where they are in the classroom? And I think that is going to have a bunch of rich and interesting discussions today for you. So I'm going to leave you with a quote. Being an inclusive instructor is a continual process. It involves making active, intentional pedagogical choices for each iteration of every course taught. So today, I would love for you to really consider, what are you doing in your class to build more inclusive space? What can you do more in your class to actually do this? The next time you teach, currently as you're teaching as well. And just always know that this is always going to be a continual process. We've never arrived. And we talk about this in our book a lot, where we're always going to be thinking carefully about inclusion. Our students will change, our classes will change, you know, what we're teaching changes. And so think about this from the start of every single course and all of the choices that you make for that particular course. And so I really appreciated being able to share a number of things with you today. I hope, and in my mind, that in our short time together, that this helped create some, thoughts that you have, reflections that you'll be able to take with you as you go into these future sessions, into the discussions that will happen, subsequent to this keynote presentation. And I'll say, enjoy the journey. It's a beautiful process. I can't tell you how many wonderful things I've heard from our instructors, from our students who build more inclusive classroom spaces for their learners. They will be very appreciative. They will remember it. They will grow. They will learn. They will be more successful. So enjoy this journey. You can always, feel free to reach out to me, at Lafayette College, and we're in Easton, Pennsylvania. And I'd love to hear what you're doing. If you're doing something really neat in a course, feel free to share it with me that has really wonderful impacts on your students. And so here are just some of the references that I referred to today. And of course, you are going to get access to these slides as well, but feel free to take a look at them. And it has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your conference.